So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the continuation of the City of Waterloo Council meeting of June 19th, 2023. We are on the second half of our agenda, and council will look for disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. And I will declare my pecuniary interest again. It's with regard to items 11A and 11B, informal public meeting for 180 King Street South, and informal public meetings for 435 King Street North and 450 to 560 Weaver Street North. And that's associated with my place of business. So the mayor will take over the chair at that time. The first staff report we have is our fire master plan update. And I understand that we have a presentation by Chief Heptich. Welcome, Chief. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. And yourself, Councillor?
I'm good, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor McCabe, Chair Freeman, and members of Council. On behalf of the Fire Rescue Services team, I am pleased to present the staff report pertaining to the Fire Master Plan update for June 2023. I note that the report and this presentation include an update of the Fire Master Plan, including preliminary recommendations, including the status of the project, where we will return in the fall of 2023 with a final master plan and recommendations. We are joined this evening by our finance team, the WPFFA membership executive team, and also our fire services management team. The purpose of the report is to present recommendations to Council that includes approval of the report, the request to release funding to initiate the procurement process to purchase one new pumper rescue, and also to endorse a phased-in staffing model subject to approval as part of the 2024-26 budget process. Presentation overview includes a focus and framework. We'll spend a fair bit of time on context and clarity about fire services, its current state, to understand future recommendations, the project background as it started in 2019 formally, historical and emergent challenges, also again the status and findings of the project, financial impacts, next steps, and a time of course for questions and comments. So the focus and framework of the Fire Master Plan pertains to the 3 lines of defense that are identified and defined by the Ontario Fire Marshal. This includes, in order of priority and precedent, where we work as a team, is to enable public education and prevention strategies. We want to stop the start of fire from the get-go by educating citizens. It also includes fire safety standards and the enforcement of the Ontario Fire Code. That's where we don't want to go. We hope that education works first and that we get compliance before there is enforcement requirements or potential thereof. And last of the 3 lines of defense is the emergency response, which is what we don't want to do. This includes fire suppression and fire investigation, with the obvious being prevention is key. The project deliverables of the Fire Master Plan are a community risk assessment that informs the Fire Master Plan with risks outlined, and of course the final Fire Master Plan project or document itself. For context and clarity, this particular slide has a fair bit of detail within. What it shows us is the location of the 4 existing fire stations in the city of Waterloo. It also notes by color coding the response zone for each of the fire stations. It's anticipated when you look at this map through planning and response capacities that the fire resources within the said station, in most cases, if not all, will be the first in unit or units on scene at a fire incident. For a general summary, our staffing is a minimum of 21 staff. They are assigned to 6 frontline vehicles, which includes a command unit, 2 ladder trucks, and 3 pumper rescue trucks. Using existing staff for certain call types, we also have a tanker that isn't necessarily staffed, but we add staff to it based upon calls, and a water tanker truck for fire incidents as well. We also have added a light duty squad unit to supply resources and staff to major fire incidents as well. This next slide speaks to structure and chimney fires. Using the data that the consultant used, having started the project in 2022, the data relates to 2016 to 2021. With respect to this map, it talks about the concentration of calls with insight to different areas of where they originate. During this time frame of 6 years, Fire Rescue Services has responded to 240 fire incidents with an annual average of 40. Fire Station 1 had 99 fires, Station 2 a close second at 75, Station 3 on Northfield Drive, 41, and Station 4 on University Avenue, 26 over this time frame. And this is just specific to confirmed structure fires and chimney fires as well, not our total call volume. This next slide, there's a lot of detail within. And it's important to spend some time on this particular slide because though we educate the public and ourselves, oftentimes the public feels that when they call 911 that a fire truck will be there in 4 or 5 minutes or up to 8 minutes as our public survey revealed. But that's not always the case as it pertains to the total call time. If we look at the color-coded sections, if you're able to see that on the screen, the first section is the detection of fire that takes place over 1 to 2 minutes. So the fire starts, a smoke alarm sounds, and it notifies occupants and does its job. It's that we hope. The next part is a report of fire. That's when someone calls 911. That takes 1 to 1.5 minutes on average. The red section shows that firefighters are dispatched, and it's the time it takes for firefighters to get to the truck, dress in their gear, and be on their way to a call. And that takes place again between 1 to 1.5 minutes on average. Travel to the incident, again, is where people think they call 911 and will be there within said time frame. So as you can see, the clock ticks from the activation of the smoke alarm and for people calling in dispatch and firefighter turnout time. This particular graphic shows a 4-minute travel time to the incident. I'll be commenting on travel times as it pertains to Waterloo and many fire departments across Canada with respect to a 4-minute benchmark and where this comes from. Next is, coded in yellow, is setup time. It takes firefighters an average of 5 minutes to set up their equipment and make entry for what we refer to a fast attack. If we think about a residential property, it's setting up hose lines, doing an assessment of the scene from an incident command perspective, and getting resources and staff to the front door. That can take up to 5 minutes. When we talk about high rises, the time is much greater than that, if you can imagine. Elevators and the use of stairs and so forth. And last, fighting the fire. This particular graphic shows about 3 minutes to suppress a fire. We would say suppress, put out. And we would say that would be a compartment fire, likely a bedroom or a living room that's on fire, not the whole house to put out in 3 minutes. So as you can see, a lot of time passes before the drive time, which helps us understand fire response capacities and the need for follow-up in this particular area. This next slide shows our service capacity. Again, it's specific to drive time for the first in unit. The data shows the drive time of the first arriving truck only. This time does not reflect the detection of fire, report of fire, calling 911. It does not represent dispatch time, setup, or putting water on the fire. In the 90th percentile, based upon data from 2021, it shows that our first unit on average, the first on-scene unit, is averaging to the 90th percentile at 6 minutes and 23 seconds. If we look back on the data from 2016, we were trending around 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The times have fluctuated over the years, that's expected, but in particular, response times, we see that there was some time savings in 2020, and during times of the pandemic, there was some data that showed less traffic helped with response times. This next slide shows drive time for the third arriving unit. And of course, the second unit comes into play. We'll be talking about that a little bit later as it pertains to recommendations and the findings of the consultant, where we are trending at the third arriving unit to arrive in 13 minutes and 29 seconds. And if you look back to 2016, we were trending at 9 minutes and 7 seconds. Why we use the first and third units for sharing data for this particular report is that for every fire incident that we have report a fire, we have a minimum of 2 pumpers and an aerial respond with a command unit. And so basically 3 frontline trucks. That shows our typical response model. Think about that clock and time passing for drive times and other requirements to enable response to a call. This next slide shows height density and intensification. This document was taken from the city's official plan pertaining specific to height and density. Most of the development, as you'll see, has taken place in the core, as we call it. This would be Station 1's area. This also provides a snapshot not only of today, but future growth. And when we think forward about the city's commitment as per the provincial planning for new home and support home development for a total of 16,000 new residential units, the final version of the Fire Master Plan will provide recommendations to support the current and future growth for the next decade. A quick project background as a reminder, formally starting in 2019 to today, we had a fire underwriter survey review report in 2019, a discussion paper in 2020, a fire master plan update on April 3rd of 2022, and a discussion paper more recently with this current budget. And again, this overall presentation talks about the project status of the fire master plan. Historical and emergent challenges pertain to fire prevention and public education, our operations and service capacity, staffing, trucks and equipment, fire station expansion, and support services, which actually are critical functions of the fire service. There's a need and emergent challenges as they pertain to the firefighter hygiene program, mechanical bay and hoist, and large vehicle space. So based upon just a quick snapshot, it's identified in the report. I believe it's page 8. It gives information based upon the consultant's methodology that call volume has increased from 4,722 in 2016 to 5,932 in 2021 annually. I can tell you that probably the greatest impact that we've seen in 2022 was a total of 9,200 calls. It was a very busy last year, so call volume has significantly increased on a day-to-day basis. And we've seen our response times for first-in units and so forth with respect to challenges and trends. Again, there's additional information in the report for council and the public to reference. The project status and findings, it's important to note that the fire underwriter survey and the consultant, they found the same risks, but they've come up with different solutions. So therein lies recommendations that we're dealing with preliminary recommendations from the consultant. Both groups indicated an increase in staffing. Both groups indicated increase in resources, that being trucks and equipment. They differed on building a new station. Fire underwriter survey said yes, and the consultant said no. What that means from the consultant's lens is that we would double up at Station 2, where there's one existing fire truck and a crew, and add another truck and crew to that particular station. There's more to that I'll touch on in the report with respect to leveraging fire stations. This particular slide shares a great deal of information with respect to the report. And what I want to punctuate is the consultant has indicated that the average drive time for a second truck in Waterloo is between 6 and 8 minutes. That's highlighted by the red oval of the two red circles and the oval, as you can see, in particular to the west side and the northeast side with respect to those time frames. The consultant has indicated that the 6-minute drive time is important because it represents reasonable travel time for a second truck to arrive at a structure fire. The central portion of Waterloo, served primarily by stations 1 and 3, have reasonably good coverage in the consultant's opinion. And also both statements made by the consultant further support their recommendation to add a truck to Station 2. We note that due to intensification, there is greater risk on the west side and south side of the city versus the northeast side of the city as noted in this particular slide. The consultant has added, as you can see, if you look very closely, is that Kitchener Fire Stations 2 and 5 are shown in this exhibit. During a budget plan meeting or a business plan discussion, council inquired several years ago if we were going to look at automatic aid with Kitchener, and the answer was yes. The consultant has found that Kitchener fire units from Station 2 and 5 can respond to the areas of interest between 6 and 8 minutes, same as Waterloo trucks that they have found. So with respect to decisions pending, we are grappling with the consultant and searching for ways. Do we build a new station, or do we formalize response enhancements out of Fire Station 1 with staff and a new squad vehicle, and a second fire truck and crew at Station 2? I note that both options will enhance risk reduce risk and enhance service capacity in the city, because all resources can be deployed across the city, not just to their response zones as indicated. And just a reminder that the consultant has identified with respect to their recommendations that we still require the opportunity to ensure space for the support services programs as they pertain to their recommendations. This slide outlines staffing, trucks, and equipment with respect to the consultant's recommendations. At this point, they have also recommended an additional fire prevention officer. At this point, we are saying no to that. We would like to look at how we can leverage the full-time equivalent prevention officer that was approved in the previous budget and hired in more recently hired, to see what that capacity brings, and perhaps look at the next budget if requirements are still needed for an additional fire prevention officer. We do not support one additional data analyst, and we do not support a business analyst, feeling that if we are successful with the assistant deputy chief position, we will have the capacity to analyze data in a way that the consultant is recommending. One key point to this is that both the fire underwriter survey and the recommendations and the consultant, their justification of staff is for fire response capacities, not for medical capacity. It goes without saying that if we do increase resources justified through fire data and so forth, it goes without saying that we can enhance our ability to respond to tiered and medical calls, where in which case they're one and the same. The consultant is also recommending support services and administration staff by way of an assistant deputy chief under current contract, a chief mechanical officer and chief training officer in day positions. Financial impacts are outlined in the report. This staff report is looking for support to endorse a phased-in staffing plan to begin in 2024 for a total of 27 staff. And there's a look at the opportunity to a 4-year implementation that includes the current 2024 to 26 budget and the first year of the next budget in 2027. We're also looking for council to support the recommendation to order 1 additional fire truck in 2023. We'd like to get that procurement process going because there's extensive delays that we learn of from manufacturers between 2 and 4 years, depending on the truck. This is a result of supply chain and COVID. The last slide shows financial impacts and phased-in staffing over 4 years, looking to hire 6 FTEs in 2024, 8 in 25, 8 in 26, and 5 in 2027. And that's a complement of administrative support staff and firefighters directly responding to fire incidents. This last slide pertains to next steps. Our plan is to finalize the Fire Master Plan project, the community risk assessment, and dig into public education and fire prevention strategies, which is a large part of the report as well, or at least in our mind for planning going forward. And also really determine support services needs to ensure space for the firefighter hygiene program, mechanical services, and large vehicle storage. We will return to council in the fall of 2023. And that's it for this brief presentation.
Thank you, Chief. I'm sure we have some questions around the table, so I'd like to look to my colleagues for questions. Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Chief Heptich, what is the labor environment like right now in terms of trying to recruit firefighters? Is it stiff competition?
Through you, Chair Freeman, to Councillor, it is stiff competition, but we have a healthy pool of applicants that do apply for positions in the fire service across the province. We belong to an organization called the Ontario Fire Administration Incorporated, where applicants across the province and beyond can have their practical skills in the areas of firefighting and medical response, including components of fitness, to assess those particular skills. And upon completion and maintenance of those certifications, they're eligible to apply to about 31 departments across the province. So it's a one-stop shopping program, if you will, that Waterloo belongs to. And I'm not sure what the typical numbers are of the applicant pool, but typically it's between 300 and 600 to 700 applicants active at one time.
Okay, and just as a follow-up, are there particular positions that you have suggested here in this fire master plan that would be harder to fill?
Through you, Chair Freeman, to Councillor, I don't think we'll have really any concerns, in particular hiring firefighters. Postings for the day positions will fall under the collective agreement with respect to those roles and responsibilities. We feel that we have enough talent from within that we quite confidently can fill those positions. And in terms of the Assistant Deputy Fire Chief, we've had that position filled by contract for about 14 months now.
Councillor Bodley?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, through you, Chair Freeman. A couple of questions here. One, it's interesting to see that the new consultant's report suggests that we don't need another station. And you referenced the housing pledge, the 16,000 new units coming online in the next 10 years. Is that the time frame that the Fire Master Plan is going out to? Is it a 10-year time horizon? And first question, and sort of addendum to that, is do we believe at any point in time that there's going to be the necessity for another fire station? And I say that just noting that there's limited land availability in the city of Waterloo, and we're already sort of out to the city limits here. So curious about your thoughts on that.
Through you, Chair Freeman, to Councillor Bodley, I have down 3 questions, and I'll seek clarity where necessary here. The first question pertains to the time frame of the Fire Master Plan. If I'm not mistaken, the pledge is 16,000 residential and support units by 2031. The Fire Master Plan at this point is slated for 10 years, which should take us right just past that particular time frame with respect to. I believe the second question was, at any time will there be a need for a new fire station? The starting point is that it hasn't been determined if we will be building a fire station or if we will be increasing units at Station 2. Regardless, from a response lens, we still would like to add the squad unit, whether we build a station or we double occupy at Station 2. Time will tell very shortly with what that looks like, working with the consultant and assembling the recommendations. But in particular, I feel that we will be poised in position for the future whether we build a new fire station or not. In particular, doubling up at Station 2 is an effective model based upon the fact that, as I alluded to with units responding, instead of having one unit responding as it does today, using the example of Station 2, provided both units are in the station, there will be 2. We refer to that as fireground force and effectiveness, meaning that instead of having 4 firefighters on scene, there will be 8 within said time frames. And that, in our view, and the consultants, we support the same. We did make that acknowledgement prior to the consultant supporting that and identifying it as well. But we feel that will be satisfactory supplement to staff and resources. I would say that at any time is there a need for a fire station. Within that particular time frame, the hope is that we are covered at least for the next 10 years, but it should be something that we're always aware of, and that would depend on many factors, some of which were identified in the metrics here today. I think I've covered both, if not 3 of your questions.
Yes, thank you, Chief. I'll try to be more succinct on my second question here without having a 1A, B, and C. through you, Chair Freeman. So there's been some discussion in the past in the Fire Master Plan about operational challenges that are associated with vertical firefighting, and I'm curious if there are also any, and you may have alluded to this in terms of arrival times, but if there are also any operational efficiencies that are gained from the fact that the city has a compact urban form and we are not sprawling out further beyond our city limits. Are there long-term operational efficiencies that we may see as a city, given the fact that we have a hard urban boundary that we've basically reached?
Through you, Chair Freeman. Councillor, I just want to make sure I understand your question. You've talked about vertical response to high rises and verifying that you're talking about the operational efficiencies, staff and resources that will be a long-term benefit, Okay, so the answer to that is yes, subject to council's approval. If what is presented here and in forthcoming aspects of the report, most of which is identified in the current report now, we will see operational efficiencies. If we have an increase in staff, an increase in resources, it means more people to fight the fire. If we're talking about a high rise, you do need more staff, there's no question. Right now, through current policies, we're sending all units and resources and staff to even an alarm to a fire incident to ensure we have enough people there as quickly as possible. So long-term, yes, staff, resources, equipment. The other parts and pieces to this is the day positions, if approved, being a mechanical officer, enhanced oversight of our repair program, preventive maintenance and so forth to keep trucks on the road, and also operational efficiencies learned by a very direct oversight of the training division. Fire Services had a training officer position that was eliminated in about 1996. 1995-96, and it was a more hands-on approach to providing training and leadership. That's not to say that current staff, we have captain training officers, don't do a great job. This just lends a greater opportunity for them to be supported, do their job with planning and so forth. So yes, in my opinion, definitely operational efficiencies will be realized. Safety is really the greatest component that we're looking for here, not only for the public, but also our firefighters responding to incidents, and including complex ones such as vertical response.
Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. Through you, Councillor Bodley's asked a couple of my questions, sort of. So I will ask a few more. And actually, I thought you were going to go somewhere with both of us representing the west side and looking at that terrible oval circle that surrounds wards 1 and 2. Chief, can you talk to us a little bit more about doubling up at Station 2 and relying a bit on the response time from Kitchener's Station 5? What difference is that going to make with that oval, given that that oval is also increasing in terms of population? It's our biggest growth area from both housing and employment lands too. That's one question.
Okay. Thank you. Through you, Chair Freeman, to Councillor Hanmer. So the relationship between doubling up at Station 2, to recap, we have 2 trucks responding from the same location at the same time, getting 8 firefighters on scene. What the consultant was asked to look at is how can Kitchener Fire help should council decide to direct fire services to establish or at least investigate automatic aid agreements. Automatic aid agreements, for context, mean that the incident commander in Waterloo doesn't have to call for help by way of emergency radio to dispatch and then deploy resources from Kitchener. That takes time. Our incident commanders are prepared to do that today, in particular at high-rise incidents or more complex incidents, or when all units are exhausted at a scene and others aren't available. So some clarity on that. How it would help with Kitchener, we weren't sure if the response times were going to be better or the same, but it turns out they in fact are the same as per the consultant's findings. Their data is very strong in all areas, and it goes without saying this is for the same. In relationship to the oval and circle on the west side and the circle in the northeast corner, the consultant has advised that the tip of the oval, let's imagine they're coming from the south to the north in all cases, is that their first arriving unit can respond to the tip of either the oval or the circles within 6 minutes. The time gets greater, projected to 8 minutes as it pertains to the length of the circle. When it comes to relying on Kitchener, that's what it would look like. And it would be a matter of, does council want to supplement service in that way? Or is council satisfied that Waterloo can respond within our existing capacities and rely on policy for the incident commander to make the call very quickly, which we do today, to call for what would be mutual aid if there isn't an automatic aid.
Right.
I hope I've explained that.
You have.
One means call for help. The other means that help is automated
It automatically
in
comes.
zones that would be identified in that particular way.
And I think given the fact that we are trying to reduce the time or hit the average times, anything that's going to be helping us get to those times is a good direction to head in. So thank you. My second question is relating to the equipment. A couple weeks ago at council, we approved a replacement for a truck, and you also talked today about an additional truck. Can you just explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. Through you, Chair Freeman, to Councillor Hanmer. The truck that was recently approved by council, that's a replacement vehicle for one of our frontline assets. The new truck that we're requesting, subject to council's approval, would be the first place once the truck is received, as the staffing complement gets phased in, would be stationed at Station 2. And resources or staff and resources would be available on that particular vehicle to get it going with respect to that new unit. If I may touch on the squad unit, that unit would run as indicated in the report out of Station 1. And there's also indication of staffing enhancements to manage that particular vehicle as well.
Okay. And if I might, just two more questions actually. And the staffing plan that you've outlined, I think, is a good measured approach given the explanation of what's happening with the vehicle. So you're adding staff for prevention purposes, and then also adding staff as we've got equipment. So I think that's a good focus for us to have. And then my final question for you is, what worries you the most about the plan?
Through you, Chair Freeman, to Councillor Hanmer, what worries the most about the plan? I guess getting up to speed with our current capacity by enhancing that as outlined in the report. Our plan is, as the staffing can increase, is to apply those resources one by one, if you will, to the west side, and then start to balance out as staff grows. The hope would be that we get the truck within 2 years or less, and start to fully staff that particular vehicle with respect to operations plans. We've spent a fair bit of time, in particular Deputy Chief Herring has oversight of operations, is working very closely with our team to look at where do the staff go and the staff go where risk is, and we balance that out for the future forward.
Great, thank you.
So.
I think the plan is a very measured plan, given length of time to get equipment, length of time to get people up to speed, and hopefully attract and keep firefighters to live out the plan. So thank you for that.
Other questions, council? Mayor McCabe, I think you're up.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Chair, and thank you, Chief, for coming in and for providing this update. It's really helpful. I was just I know I had emailed you this about the call volumes. I'm just wondering if I think that would be helpful for council to have the breakdown of the call volumes that we receive. So whether I can just forward it to council, but I think that's really good information for all of us to have, because I had asked the chief to just give us a breakdown of its roughly 9,000 calls and how many of them are, medical, how many of them are, I forget all the different lists, but I'll share that with council. But I think that's helpful information for us to know, just in terms of adding more context to the work that you do. But one of my questions is, you had mentioned in your presentation that the fire response capacity doesn't equate to the medical response capacity. Is that so? You said something kind of like that. So what I'm wondering is, because and when I saw the call volumes, there was I think nearly 50% of them are medical calls. And so I'm wondering, because there was a lot of code reds with paramedics over the last year, or if not more, maybe 2 years. So I'm wondering if, because the region has added more paramedic staff and more capacity, I should know the number, but I'm forgetting off the top of my head, a couple more ambulances, or maybe 4 more ambulances and staff for that. How you are anticipating that might impact your call volumes from the medical side? How or if?
Okay. Through you, Chair Freeman, to Mayor McCabe, thank you for the update and for sending the call volume and breakdown to fellow councillors. That pertains to 2022 data. The medical response part that I was speaking to is that both the Fire Underwriter Survey and the consultant are recommending an increase in staff and resources. When they assess and analyze data for such justification, it is not related to medical response. They don't look at the medical response data to say, here's your fire risk, this is what you need. They don't include medical. And that's because those are our core services. And while that may seem counterintuitive, the reality is that the Fire Protection Prevention Act speaks to fire services and core services, which is what we do. The add-on, if I can use that term in a very meaningful way, is that we respond to medical calls. And that started in the early to mid-90s through tiered response, meaning that police, ambulance, police, paramedics, and fire respond, and the first to get there can start to do something such as CPR. So I hope that provides a little bit of clarity in that area as a result of their justification. But the reality is the medical response time is enhanced as well because we have more resources, we have more staff to deploy to calls, and in some cases multiple calls at the same time.
That is helpful, thank you. So I guess though with the region increasing the number of paramedics, do you think that will reduce the amount of the add-on? Again, I know you're meaning that in a very meaningful way, but do you think that will reduce the amount of times that you need to be called out? Our fire services, like in terms of that tiered response, that now there'll be more paramedics to go out, will that decrease your medical calls, do you think?
Through you, Chair Freeman, to Mayor McCabe, in theory it should. With respect to such enhancements with paramedic services, I would await their data and information with respect to it should reduce, not necessarily reduce our calls, but perhaps the amount of time that we spend on scene because paramedics are either there first or second with respect to, so the call volume will still be there. It's just a matter of who gets there first, and quite frankly, is fire required at the scene? And we defer to paramedics as the higher medical authority, whether they would like to keep us there if they have, assessed the patient and they don't require fire. So again, I don't think it will reduce our call volume and response volume, but rather perhaps the time on scene.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And then since you mentioned the tiered response, I was just curious about about that tiered response. And I know Niagara has that, and I know we've been, I think, talking about getting something like that in Waterloo region for a number of years. Could you maybe just provide an update on what's happening from that perspective?
For sure. Through you, Chair Freeman, to Mayor McCabe, that's a great question, and it is punctuated in the consultant's report with respect to fire responding to medical calls. I'd like to start that both personally and professionally, I very much support tiered response and believe that fire does and can continue to make a difference. What Mayor McCabe is referring to is medical priority dispatching, and that is the Ministry of Health initiative in the province of Ontario that by and large, through my own understanding at this point, means that a 911 dispatcher will ask a couple more questions to determine if it truly is an emergency, or lights and sirens, if you will, on behalf of paramedics. And that's when we typically respond. If they're responding lights and sirens, it's probably a tiered call that we respond to. It is anticipated that with the introduction of medical priority dispatching, that it can reduce our medical call volume up to 50%. That's extremely significant. It's happening across the province. Niagara, I believe, was one of the first regions to be implemented. In a recent conversation with Chief Riches from Paramedic Services, he indicated that the region of Waterloo can expect MPDS to be implemented in the next 2 years. What that means to fire services is that if there is in fact a reduction in calls with respect to the medical priority dispatching, is that where do we put our time? And the reality is there's a lot that we can do within that time. When we look at the 3 lines of defense as it pertains to the Office of the Fire Marshal recommendations, we can enhance existing and build new programs for public education and safety. We have an existing program that we implemented in about 2015 where firefighters basically book an appointment for one-stop shopping, as we referred to it, to go to a high-rise location, do a tactical pre-plan, which basically is a footprint of a building in all of its complexities that pertain to safe emergency response and awareness for firefighters. At the same time, firefighters were doing basically a simplified immediate danger to life and health threats that may be witnessed in a building, taking notes, blocked exits, is the fire panel online and active, are the exit signs lit, looking for simple things and opportunities, and also doing public education. So that particular program was introduced. That can be enhanced as well. The other side of it, when we talk about efficiencies and effectiveness, is that there will be more time for training with respect for staff to keep up on their skills. As a result of the province mandating core education and training for firefighters, there's an increased focus on training and education, and also coupled with our situation and circumstance in the city of Waterloo with a need for specialized rescue and response, as we're seeing, light rail transit and so forth, it will give us time to look at those particular programs and train our staff. We see that as a very significant benefit. And one thing to Councillor Bodley's point, it is possible that we'll be able to, subject to council's approval, if we get an additional vehicle, we may be able to dedicate a vehicle to training that can stay and do training, because we have ability to cover the city with the other available units to get more training done. That vehicle will always be available, but I don't want to get too far into it. But there truly is a lot that fire can do in those particular areas with respect to where do we put our time. We see that as an opportunity to enhance our core service capacity and safety.
Thank you. That's fairly helpful. And just for my own clarity, 27, is that 27 potential new staff? Is that 2 crews then?
Through you, Chair Freeman, to Mayor McCabe, that would be staffing for a new pumper, and also staffing to supplement the squad response, the squad unit. And we're looking at utilizing existing and the possibility of having new staff to operate that vehicle, subject to council's approval for the squad.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate
welcome.
the information.
Other questions, council? I have a question. Can I trouble you, Chief, to go back to your slide where you show the staffing breakdown and the phasing in? So in 2024, the 4 firefighters, that would be to staff the new piece of equipment that you're expecting, not the replacement piece. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Councilor?
The 4 firefighters in 2024.
Oh, yes.
That would be to staff the new piece of equipment that you're asking for approval for tonight. Is that correct, or is?
No, to your question, we don't expect that we would get the vehicle that quickly.
Right.
With respect to supply chain and COVID delays. As I indicated previously, we will put the resources where the risk is. And our initial plan and thinking is that we would add 1 additional firefighter to the existing pumper 2 out of the Columbia Street station. So instead of having 4 staff on that vehicle as it is now, typically, I would say probably 98% of the time, we would add, subject to staffing, we would add that 1 additional person to that vehicle. So there's 5 people on a truck, not 4.
Okay. And the chief mechanic officer, would they be allocated to Station 2 as well, or to?
The chief mechanical officer would work out of Station 1. That's presently where the mechanical division works out of.
Okay.
They would be located out of Station 1.
And that's a second person then to you have a mechanic there now, right?
We have 4 mechanics. What's unique to the city of Waterloo is that we have a chief mechanic and 3 mechanics, if you will. So one mechanic per platoon, and there's 4 platoons. Those mechanics don't just do mechanical repairs and preventive maintenance. They also, primarily they're firefighters, and if they're not training or responding to calls, they're fixing trucks.
Right. And once the new piece of equipment comes then in 2025, that's the up staff to 8. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I guess one of my questions is item 3 of the recommendation is to endorse a phased staffing model tonight. And it just feels a little bit tricky because then it says it's subject to approval. So it kind of feels like we are approving it, even though it says subject to approval. So I think that it's important from a clarity perspective that this is another point in time where I'm running the cash register bell, that you know, if we approve the recommendation as printed, we're committing to this resource now. And so it's not really subject to approval for 2024 because we're telling the chief kind of to go out and hire, right? So I realize, and I guess it's a bit tricky too because we don't actually have the fire master plan in hand. So the questions that would inherently come up associated with the fire master plan and the staffing ask aren't hand in hand. I appreciate the summary that you've given us, but it's still a bit tricky. So I kind of wanted to bring that to council's attention. And in my thinking process, which has been substantially scattered today, I did forget to ask you about the fuss rating. Like does it stay the same? Is it changing? Is it being lowered even with the investments that you're asking for this evening?
So thank you for your question and comments, Chair Freeman. The current fire underwriter survey review comes to its 5-year term this year. We've already spoken with fire underwriter survey. We're expecting to hear from them late this year to do a reassessment that will have a 5-year duration as well. I can tell you that the last assessment we stayed the same in our rating, but what they shared directly is that I'm not trying to put council on the spot. This is paraphrasing their words, but if you don't make improvements in certain areas, your rating is likely to change. And if it does change, it can influence insurance rates as they provide the information to fire underwriters across the country, as a matter of fact. So the hope would be that it would change, at least be maintained at the very least. I can say that with respect to all things considered, there's much that we have attempted to do and tried to do that don't involve budget. So there's also a side of responsibility in our management team's part, and staff for that matter, to keep up on certain areas such as pre-planning and so forth. And I think there's 42 different areas. The ones that come out for this particular report obviously have the greatest impact on the budget, and that's why they're presented here this evening. So really, to answer your question, the latter part of it is that we don't know where we will land with fire underwriter survey. What we do know is what they recommended. They've identified the same risks as the consultant, just different recommendations.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I guess maybe everyone on council understands about the fire underwriter survey. I certainly didn't when I first came to council, so I didn't understand that it more broadly could affect home insurance for homeowners based on our investment in fire. So that's very helpful. Thank you, Chief. So again, I'm looking to council. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Hi. I have a question of council. I'm just, to your point, Chair, about recommendation number 3 and the fact that we don't actually have the full fire master plan. So is council, are you suggesting that perhaps we separate recommendation 3 out and wait until we have the fire master plan before we endorse before we further discuss or endorse the phased staffing model?
Well, I guess that I'm not saying that it has to be that way. I'm just identifying to council that if we approve the recommendation as it's written, mm-hmm. we are making commitments into the 3-year budget, and we could be fine with that. And I mean, I think that the way to test that is to see whether there's someone who'd like to put the motion on the table as written, and or an amendment to the motion as written. And I'm not trying to force a different outcome. I'm just trying to raise this to council's attention for consideration, because we've been doing a lot of these incremental pieces over the last little while, and our budget's not infinite. So, yeah, Councillor Bodley.
Through you, Chair Freeman, maybe a question that might help me in this part of the conversation is, I mean, perhaps the number is not 24 or 27 full FTEs here by the end of year 4, but regardless of what we discuss tonight, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that it's more than 6, which we have approved for, or which you're proposing for year 1. So my question is, as we get the fire master plan in the fall, and as we go through budget deliberations for the 3-year budget over the winter, will there be some flexibility if these numbers do end up fluctuating slightly, ideally down, but if up or down, in terms of our ability to how it gets phased in, should we approve the phased in approach, broadly speaking, this evening?
Through you, Chair Freeman, to Councillor Baudelaire, I do believe that the recommendations will be presented in the final version of the Fire Master Plan. We do commit to coming back to Council in the fall of 2023. Our plan is to do so by September, and we've advised the consultant of the same to get a final product. Whether the numbers go up or down or are status quo, that will be, Council's decision based upon recommendations. And I would say both now and in the future, leading up to a final report, I would be happy to answer any questions on behalf of our team to share insight for Council to help you make a decision with respect to.
Okay, I think that's very helpful. Councillor Handmaid, did you want to add something to this conversation, or did you want to put a motion on the table?
I'll put the motion
Okay.
forward. So with a comment, I think, thank you, Chief, and staff and team for all the work that you've done to get us to this point. And I recognize that we don't have the full master plan yet, but we've got all of the bits and pieces that are going to formulate it. And to our finance chair, I recognize that we are committing dollars to year 1 of our budget. I think it's something that's well worth us doing. The safety of the residents in this community is the one thing that is one of our responsibilities, and this is a way of demonstrating that. So I'm pleased to put the motion forward as it is written in our briefing today, and I'll be voting in favor of it.
Councillor Roach, are you seconding that motion?
Yes, I'd like to second that motion.
Did you have a comment that you wanted to add, or?
Yeah, sure. Let me add this. Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you, Chief. While considering, budget concerns, it's essential to weigh the potential benefits versus the costs. And I think 24 firefighters. That's a very incredible cost. But there may be cost savings in the long run. I mean, while increasing the amount of firefighters, it requires an initial investment. It can lead to long-term, savings. You got swift response times, less property damage, and just other things to consider too. Like with regard to, firefighters playing a role, beyond firefighting. As the mayor was, mentioning about, medical calls, you're often the first responders to medical emergencies, traffic accidents. And, I think by increasing the amount of firefighters, the city can improve its overall emergency response. Code Red was brought up, and I think that I support this motion, and I'll be voting in favor of it.
That's great. Is there any other comments, Council? I just wanted to add a comment to say that I also support the motion as written. As finance chair, I just feel very obligated to draw to Council's attention when we are making decisions ahead of our 3-year process. More broadly, I hope that the fire master plan, when it comes, also helps to tie together a few of these other pieces in terms of helping to provide a role in management of house insurance rates, and breaking down, like helping people to better understand the core roles as well as your suppression roles, as well as the fire prevention roles, and how increasing fire prevention and the goal of doing that by preventing fires at the source, how that all ties together. I think that would be incredibly helpful. And I do appreciate all the time that has gone into this, and I know that I can see the president of the association here today, and your staff team too, Chief. And this is a team effort, and I understand that. So I do thank you for all of this. At this point, I would like to call the question. All those in favor of the motion as presented? And that's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, at this point, I am going to take a moment to vacate the chair and allow the mayor to take over.
Just so people are aware, we're just waiting for a couple members of council to return. So we have, because we need to wait for quorum in order to start the next agenda item. So stay tuned. They'll be right back. Okay, we are good, so we will resume. We are moving into the informal public meeting and to consider a couple of reports. Prior to beginning those, and I know we have a couple of delegations here as well, but prior to beginning those, I need to read for each of these proposals a lengthy disclaimer. So this is an informal public meeting to consider item 9A, zoning bylaw amendment Z-23-051000237993 Ontario Inc., Axia Geocapital Inc., 180 King Street South. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position on this application, and a staff report will be considered by council during a formal public meeting at a future time. All property owners within a 120 meters of this subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. Anyone who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located at the desk at the rear of the council chambers, just back there. And if there is more than one registry, please make sure you are signing the appropriate one, but I think there's just one there. The planner, Max Kerrigan, will now provide a brief overview of the application. Welcome, Max. Oh, just, yeah, there we go.
Good evening, Mayor McCabe, members of council, staff, and members of the public. My name is Max Kerrigan, and tonight I'll be presenting the informal public meeting for zoning bylaw amendment Z2305 for lands located at 180 King Street South. This application was submitted by Axia Geocapital Incorporated, represented here tonight by Carol Wiebe and Jen Gaudette of MHBC Planning, and John McDonald of McDonald Architects, who will be co-presenting following my general overview presentation. Subject lands are located on the northeast corner of King Street South and Allen Street, occupied by the Allen Square office building. Looking southeast, you can see the existing structure is a 7-story office building tucked between the heritage designated Herb Kumpf house and the red condominium. Looking northward, you can see the building's relationship to Allen Street, including several mature trees and landscaping on both frontages. Looking westward from Allen Street, you can see the existing structured parking deck that abuts the neighboring church property to the east. And looking another view here showing the structured parking and how it abuts George Street as it extends between Allen Street to George Street. For a wider context, the subject property is located at the southern end of the city's Uptown Growth Center, indicated in yellow, which is considered the city's primary node in the official plan. As is typical of most urban cores, the Uptown is flanked by mature established lower density residential neighborhoods, as you can see to the east and west of the King Corridor. So the development proposal. The applicant will provide a much more fulsome presentation into the details of the proposal, but in general, it is an adaptive reuse of the existing Allen Square structure and an addition of 3 new stories upon that structure. The conversion of the office space to residential use is proposed with active commercial uses at grade. The conversion would result in 129 units, and the existing 152 parking spaces would be retained, and 112 bicycle parking spaces would be provided. With respect to the planning framework in the official plan, as previously mentioned, the development sits within the primary growth center, and it is designated commercial. More specifically, it's designated Uptown Mixed Use within the commercial designation, and it is in an area known as the Uptown Complementary Transition Area, which essentially runs from the Kitchener border to William Street. As per the OP, lands within the Uptown Mixed Use designation are planned to accommodate medium to high density mixed use development that include predominantly residential and office employment uses in freestanding or mixed use buildings. Such uses are intended to complement the planned function of the Uptown Commercial Core by providing market support for the commercial uses within the core. The height and density permissions in the OP for these lands are 40 meters, the equivalent of 12 stories, and a maximum density of 600 bedrooms per hectare. With respect to the zoning bylaw permissions, the lands are zoned U230 or Uptown Mixed Use. Uptown Mixed Use permits a maximum density of 525 bedrooms per hectare and up to 30 meters in height, which is equivalent to 9 stories. Notable here is that the OP and the zoning bylaw have slightly different density and height permissions, which isn't all that common in the city. The lands are also located in parking area A, which requires a minimum of 0.7 spaces per dwelling unit. So the zoning bylaw amendment request. In order to develop as per the plan submitted, the applicant's requesting to rezone the subject lands from Uptown Mixed Use 30 to Uptown Mixed Use 40, which would permit the increase in height. And as mentioned on the last slide, this amendment would result in the zoning permissions being more consistent with the official plan. In addition to the zone change, there's a laundry list of site-specific exceptions which would be required to permit the request. This list is, for the most part, as a result of the intention to retain the existing structure, which is legal non-conforming. So the list of site-specific provisions to legalize this, the existing building largely relate to the existing setbacks and as well as the form of the tower, which is bulkier than is currently permitted with respect to tower floor plate length and size, and it does not include a podium. So to demonstrate that graphically, to provide additional clarity, you can see here the proposed site extents are indicated in red. And if you look, and the proximity of the tower and parking structure to the property lines here. And as you can see, the parking structure extends towards King and Allen and the Kumpf House to almost a zero lot line setback. And to understand, it's also important to understand that for the purpose of zoning interpretation, the parking structure, including those parts that are at grade but exposed, are considered part of the building. So as shown here, reduced setbacks are required to be legalized, and as is the building massing, as are the dimensions of existing parking space size and loading size, which were larger than what is currently permitted. Now, in terms of new specific provisions being requested, they're required to permit a number of the additions. So a graphic here to help in that explanation. These include reduced setbacks to one-story additions on the 3 frontages, which would sit upon the existing underground parking structure, and the reduced step back to projected balconies as well proposed, and the request for a podium that is shorter than is currently permitted, as well as some modified vehicular and parking type ratios. So the applicant has submitted various plans, reports, and studies as part of their complete submission, which have been circulated to internal staff and review agencies. This information has also been posted online at Engage WR, which can be found by simply searching 180 King, Waterloo, Engage, and it will be your first hit. And in terms of process and next steps, we will complete a review of the submitted reports. I will consider any feedback received from the public, commenting agencies, city staff, and council, and I will assess whether the requested amendments and site-specific zoning provisions constitute good planning, after which I'll produce a staff report with a recommendation to council. We will then hold a formal public meeting at a future date to be determined, at which point council will make a final decision on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, and that concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Max. I appreciate that. So council, does anyone here have questions for staff? Yep, go ahead, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Thank you so much. One question I'm just considering right now is the setbacks and the heritage site. So is there any impact on the heritage site? Is there going to be a request for a reduced setback on that side? And would the Municipal Heritage Committee need to be contacted about that proposal?
Sure. Through Mayor McCabe to Councillor Rowe, there's a request to legalize the existing setback, which is less than what is currently permitted, as well as a request to permit a one-story addition on the slab that exists. Heritage impact assessment was submitted as part of the application, and it is actually an item on the agenda to go to the Heritage Committee to review and ensure that there aren't any adverse impacts on that property through construction and the eventual build out if it is approved.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I apologize. I didn't read the exact statement I was supposed to read, so just indulge me. Please remember this is an informal public meeting and only questions of clarification may be asked. Please do not express any opinions at this time. So with that said, Councillor Vasic.
Thanks, through you, Mayor McCabe. I'm just trying to wrap my head around like how it goes from what it is now to the repurposing. Like they just look so totally different. So I just don't know. I'm just curious how that will happen. And then I'm wondering what the planning rationale for it is. Like, are there benefits to repurposing it versus demolishing it? Probably environmental. Can you just tell me a little bit more about how it goes from the before to the after?
Through Mayor McCabe to Councillor Vasic, I'm not going to stand here and pretend to be an architect or someone who weighs the balance or the different carbon offsets and those sorts of things related to demolition versus new construction. But we do have an in-house expert, the architect on hand, who I'm sure can answer in more detail. But from a personal standpoint, I can certainly support, I will support, I would always promote, rather, I don't want to say I'm necessarily supporting this because I haven't reviewed the materials, but adaptive reuse where we can makes a lot of sense in many respects. But I'm sure John will be able to provide more detail on how the technical aspects of repurposing this work, because it does look very challenging, I'm sure. You're welcome.
And John's not here tonight, no? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Did you want him to respond now? Okay, great, thank you. So, Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I just want to, this is the first time we've encountered a conversion project like this in the city of Waterloo, correct?
Through Mayor McCabe to Councillor Wright, I can't confirm or deny that, but one of this scale, I guess, on King Street, in my time with the city, I'm not familiar with one like this.
And the reason I'm asking is because it's only sort of recently become something that I think a number of municipalities are looking at, just in terms of the feasibility of these sorts of conversions. Not every property presents the right conditions, so I'm just curious whether we had done one previously. And so my follow-up is whether we have looked at other municipalities where conversion projects are underway.
Through Mayor McCabe to Councillor Wright, I have not delved into comparing to other case studies just as of yet, but as part of my review, I'll certainly look into, whether it makes sense from a, cost effectiveness or environmental impact standpoint or not.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through Mayor McCabe. Could I get you to maybe speak to why or how there's a difference between what the OP is saying and what our zoning bylaw is saying? Maybe on an overarching perspective, if you'd like there are other places like this throughout the city where the OP is different from the zoning bylaw, but in this specific instance as well too, if you could share sort of how that comes to be, I would appreciate that.
Through Mayor McCabe to Councillor Bodley, I actually am unsure why this is the case, why they don't align directly. In most cases they do. I can certainly circle back and provide you a response. I can speak with our growth management staff or
I see Mr. Cotter
director over there.
Yeah, has some information to add.
Through you, Mayor McCabe, to Councillor Bodley. In this case, because the property is a mid-rise site abutting a low-rise neighborhood, through the comprehensive zoning bylaw, we did take a fairly cautious approach and lowered the height slightly in the zoning bylaw as of right, recognizing the existing building was less than the regulation that we originally established. So in this case, the merits of increasing the height will be evaluated by Max and after reviewing the materials supported in the application. But part of the consideration is that context of transitioning from low-rise neighborhoods to higher density sites. But that's the reason.
Thank you, Mr. Cotter. Did you have a follow-up? No. Other questions from council? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Max. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Information. And we will go to the delegations. And the first delegations are Carol Weeb, I hope I'm saying that right, from MHBC Planning, and Jennifer Godette from MHBC Planning as well. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor McCabe, members of council, staff, and members of the public. My name is Carol Weeby. I'm a partner with MHBC Planning based in Kitchener, and as Max said, also present is Jen Godette from our Office of Senior Planner, and John McDonald, who is the principal architect of John McDonald Architect, also based out of Kitchener. We are here this evening to present what we believe is a very exciting project that entails the first full office building conversion from office to residential. And I'm sure some of you have been reading in the news lately that there are several office buildings in downtown Kitchener that are going through a similar conversion from office to residential, but this is the first one where we have an entire office building being converted to residential. And not surprisingly, you're probably all aware of what's driving some of this is that this global pandemic and the work to remote work from home has vacated a lot of office buildings globally, not just in KW, not just in Canada, but all major cities are struggling with this surplus of vacant office space. And it's not ideal. If we want to create vibrant neighborhoods, we don't want vacant buildings, whether they're residential or commercial. A vacant building doesn't lead to the vitality of this neighborhood. This building in particular has struggled with leasing over the last number of years, which is probably one of the main reasons why the previous owners sold it. It was what they referred to as an underperforming asset. It's always had challenges in terms of attracting tenants, and part of it is it's a 40-year-old building. It doesn't meet the current needs of today's workplace. It's, most of you know it, it's heavy concrete, small windows, dark and deep. So those office spaces aren't attractive. And now, post-pandemic, when there's a real competition for office space, the new office buildings that are highly tech-oriented, new and inviting, those are where the new businesses are going to go. So buildings like Allen Square are not going to be able to compete. So when this property was sold just over a year ago, our client bought it with the sole intent of trying to tackle that conversion. And to your point, Councillor, not every office is ideally suited. If it's too big, you end up with too much interior space. But through the genius of John and his team, they've been able to reconfigure those floor plates, use some interior storage space to that inner core, and still create some interesting layouts for some of the office, or for some of the residential units. So we look at this as a great opportunity. We're really excited about it. And Jen is going to take you through our presentation. There probably is a fair bit of duplication with what Max already covered, but we'll go through it as quickly, and then we want to leave as much time as possible for the three of us on our team to answer any additional questions. And we know we're still early on in the process, so there may be some questions that council have or members of the public that deal with the mechanics and the nuts and bolts of that building. We may not be able to answer those this evening, but we'll take notes and we'll make a point of addressing those for when this application comes back. So I'm going to give Jen the podium. She'll go through this presentation, and as I said, we'll be around as long as there's questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol, and welcome, Jennifer.
Hi, thank you. So Mr. Kerrigan stole most of my thunder, but I'll take you through. So the site here is outlined in red. As Mr. Kerrigan mentioned, there's a heritage building right here, if you follow my mouse, at 172 King Street South. We've got the red condo building to the south, Bauer, and the Circle Lofts. Right here is the previous adult rec center, which has been sold with the intent to construct office. Similar slide here, just showing you the context. The LRT station's here, red condo, our site. Here you can see the parking deck entrance, and there's an entrance to the underground parking right here. So as mentioned, there's quite a few opportunities that we're very excited about for this building. The official plan does direct intensification to this site because it's within a major transit station area. It's in Uptown Waterloo, so it promotes mixed-use buildings. Conversion of an existing underperforming building into a mixed-use project with ground floor commercial and 129 residential rental buildings. It's really exciting, and it can help promote more vitality and use of the existing commercial within Uptown. There is a structurally sound building that has a floor plate that we can convert to residential. And because it's an existing building, there are reduced impacts on the neighborhood in terms of construction. There are also constraints. As council is well aware, bedrooms require windows, so that limits our opportunities to configure the existing floor plate into residential. We also want to have light to reach the interior of the units. The existing support columns limit our ability to do a step back for the additional floors. Parking is as exists, and the setbacks are established. There's quite a bit of expensive modification that's required to convert to residential, so that's an additional constraint. We have to meet a new building code when we go residential, and the existing parking limits our landscaping options because the underground parking is so extensive. So our proposed development, it's 129 residential units within the existing building and an additional 3 stories. The ground floor would be commercial, and there are 2 additions proposed. The first ground floor one you can see here, it's 1 story, and there's a mirrored one at the south end. And then there's a new a new trellis and promenade along the commercial ground floor that provide animation for King Street. You can see the new cladding with balconies, reconfigured windows, and a more modern material. Site plan shows the same. This is the ground floor addition on this side and the same on the other side. You can see the balconies added. And although it is 10 stories, there's a dividing line right here. So this half facing King is 10, and at the rear it's only 9. Views from King Street. So this is outside of Bauer. You can see the existing versus proposed. The additional height is pretty minimal in terms of visual impact, but you can very clearly see that the more modern cladding, new balconies, and the promenade are quite attractive versus the existing. This is from Allen Street, so from the residential neighborhood. You can see the additional height is pretty minimal. The ground floor addition is very well blended and hidden behind the existing trees, which we are proposing to retain. You can see here that step back that I mentioned, where it's 9 stories here and 10 is oriented towards King Street, and then we're keeping the existing parking entrances. This is from the west, so Circa's over here, and Bauer's kind of off screen, but over here. So you can see we're facing King Street, so you can see the promenade at the bottom, and then the additional height. At the top here, this little circular feature is a mechanical screening of the penthouse, the mechanical penthouse, and that's where we're proposing solar panels. So as Mr. Kerrigan covered, the official plan does permit the use, the density, and the height that we're proposing within this designation. Additionally, directs mixed-use development to major transit station areas and the growth center of Uptown Waterloo, and walkability and sustainability in general. To implement the OP designation, we do need a zoning bylaw amendment. Quite a bit of it is to recognize the existing conditions. The new provisions would be to recognize the podium, which is those 2 additions on the ground floor, which are on top of the existing underground parking, reduced commercial parking, reduced type B bicycle parking, and to just redefine the way the podiums are defined in the bylaw to suit that we're doing a 1-story. I would like to point out here that we are in excess for the residential parking by about 40 parking stalls or so. Cultural heritage, this building right here is the heritage building. So we do have the ground floor addition, you can see here, which will interface with the heritage. It's on top of the existing underground. And because this building is existing and we're going up in both cases, we don't have to do any shoring, any underground excavation or anything like that. So that reduces impacts on the neighborhood and on the heritage building. We did do a heritage impact assessment, and it did recommend, out of an abundance of caution, that we do install a vibration monitoring system in the basement of Allen Square. And that's just to make sure we're not going to affect the foundation of the heritage structure. Adaptive reuse of an existing building is inherently sustainable. Proposing heat pumps, solar panels, the new windows and cladding are high performing. Tenants will have individual control and metering of their heating and cooling, and there is electric vehicle and bicycle parking proposed. As Max mentioned, quite a few studies have already been done to assess the suitability of this, and they all supported the proposal. Conclusion, it conforms to the regional and city official plans, requires a zoning bylaw amendment to implement, provides about 1,500 square meters of ground floor commercial, 129 rental residential units, and repurposes an existing underperforming building in a prime location. Thank you for your attention. We're here to answer any questions, and as mentioned, John, the architect, is here as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and Carol as well. And again, just a quick reminder to council that this is the informal public meeting, and we are strictly asking questions of clarification and not expressing any opinions. So I'll turn it over to you, council. Councilor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I'm so curious about the podium elements of the building, and I feel like I have a good sense of what that street front on King Street is like, but I didn't get a clear sense of what Allen Street looks like and what that space between the Heritage Building, we got like just a little bit of a viewpoint there. I'm just wondering if you can provide a little more context for, what that podium is composed of. And at the front, it really seems like, more that with that trellis feature, more of a colonnade kind of approach. And is that what's proposed for the Allen Street, or is it because of the way the picture looks right now? It looks like the trees are fully there and kind of overlapping the building. So I'm just trying to understand that context. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So through you, your worship, to Councillor, I'll bring up an image here that might help illustrate it a little better. And disclaimer, we are still working out the details, and there are no tenants yet, so that will change. But this is Allen Street here, and this is King. So right now, the main facade would be along King Street, and along here, the addition, we were thinking maybe a spa potentially, or a restaurant. So depending on the use that goes in there, it would change the way it's ultimately built out. But I would imagine there'd be quite a bit of glazing to soften it along Allen, and less so towards the Heritage.
So just to follow up through you, Mayor, that Allen Street side then, as it appears now, that is a solid structure along there.
I don't think we have that detail quite worked out, but John, maybe you could provide some additional.
Thank you kindly, Jen. Through you, Chair, to the councillor. So the intention of the thrust of the design so far is, in fact, that we would be targeting a restaurant tenancy through there. And in fact, it would have a bit of a European feel and very glazed to Allen. In fact, some of that might open and close depending upon the weather. So the intention is it's not blank at all, I guess would be the answer to the question. Okay. Very, very engaging and very open. We are cognizant of the trees that are there, and we are cognizant that we're going to need to work through solutions that pertain to that. I'll just say, if I may, on the Heritage side, that piece of the building is much closer to the property line. It is a private property line, so the building code has lots to say about how open and how engaging we can be in that direction, but the intention is to engage as much as possible given those building code and fire code considerations.
Can I have one more?
Yep, go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, again, just in consideration of the excess parking, has there been thought about having a green space at grade if those spots might not, if they're like fully in excess, because it is so close to the transit station and it would be prioritized for active transportation?
Yeah, so through you, your worship, to the councillor, if we were doing a new build, perhaps, because this is an existing structure, we're kind of working with what we have right now. It is 40 years old, so it's kind of built as a big mass. So we're just dealing with what we have right now, but we are allocating quite a bit of the existing parking to the residential uses, because we're aware there is a shortage of parking in the neighborhood.
Just to add to that, what may not be apparent is where those two podiums are being proposed. Right now, if you walk along there, you're going to see just a concrete slab. And that is the roof of the underground parking. So we can't actually landscape that because we have a thick slab of concrete. And the same with the parking deck. There's an underground parking garage underneath that. So we can't dismantle part of that structure to create some landscaping. That is one of the challenges of this site, is that there's a lot of concrete because it was geared towards an office use. So there will be a rooftop terrace, and we're looking at, if you've walked along there, you'll see that there are some fairly deep planting beds along King Street. The intent is to maintain those, but we can't really plant on top of those where the concrete slabs are. It's just a limitation, unless we just can't do it. So it's unfortunate. Yeah.
Thank you. Are you okay? Councillor Vasic?
So same question for, I think, for John. It's just about the before and after, but then also another question: do we hate that style of architecture that the building is right now? And by we, I mean society.
And sorry, just before you start, John, just for the record, if you could state your name and where you state your name and where you work, just for the record. It's part of the process here.
Thank you kindly, and good evening, Chair, members of council, and staff, and members of the public. We're very happy to be here this evening to listen to the feedback that we will get this evening. My name is John MacDonald. I'm the principal architect at John MacDonald Architect. Our offices are in the Public Utilities Commission building in downtown Kitchener. We'd like to be of service to the public and some utility. So, two questions potentially. An earlier question regarding, how this might happen and what are sort of the challenges, and what Jennifer has illustrated previously about both those constraints and opportunities that we have. And then specifically the second question, which, my apologies, I'm going to ask you to reframe if you could just repeat the question.
Yeah, I mean, so where my question comes from is thinking through just how the Uptown can doesn't become sort of a homogenous place, but can be aesthetically different. And so we have the Bauer lofts that have kept the old heritage, and I don't know if this would be considered heritage in any way, but it's a particular kind of architecture. And so and I can't have I guess I can have an opinion about the old one, but I guess my question is, when you build something new and it comes from something old, do you want to keep any of those elements? So when I ask, do we hate that style of architecture, it's with the intention of asking, is there anything of merit in that building to keep visual differences in the Uptown that kind of carry us along in our story of Waterloo? Like, I think people know this building, and whether they think it's pretty or not, it has a particular mark in the Uptown. And then this new building is more modern, like you've said. So curious if there's any benefits to the urban design and appeal of the Uptown to have that particular difference in the context of the heritage through the ages, I guess.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. The style in the early 70s had a name which came out of England and the United Kingdom, and it was called the New Brutalism. Was the actual name of the architectural style. Says it all in some respects. And it was typified by a view of modernism and the use of concrete to very simple forms, and in some ways, and in my opinion, in a kind of scaleless way. Those of us who've been around the community for many, many years might recall that at one point there was some graffiti on the building where someone had spray painted the words "Be reasonable" the front of the building, and this potentially a bit of architectural criticism at the time, even in the 80s, of the new brutalist kind of aesthetic that's there. I think what I'd like to key in on is that this building has been organized to have a very gracious ground floor. It's 16 feet high. It's almost a requirement that we would look to that in these days, but it wasn't always done that way, that ground floors would be so gracious in height. And the way the parking and the parking deck have been organized, it will allow this building to have significant depth to the commercial at the ground floor and its relationship to King Street, the possibility for patios and terraces. And so, although we may be and are intending to tear the skin off entirely and to reclad it in a way that allows for balconies and allows for us to overcome some of those technical challenges, it's really, I think, the ground floor that, if you will notice in some other developments and new buildings, that ground floor tends to be, in a very muscular way, preoccupied with car parking and with kind of other maneuvers that have to happen on the property. And it chews up ground floor space, and then the portion that's left over to engage with the community, to engage with the street, is potentially quite narrow or quite, it lacks depth to actually allow businesses to make a go of it. So I think my answer to your question would be that this gracious ground floor is something that I think we can provide tremendous opportunity for, in terms of trellis, in terms of patios, in terms of engaging both onto King and over to Allen as well. I'm hoping that that's helped inform you a little bit.
I was mostly just watching how you answered that and wondered if I'll ever be able to answer another question that somebody else had. So I think you've answered a question, but I don't know if you've answered my question. I do appreciate how you've gotten from there to here, and I appreciate what you're saying to me, which I think partially answers my question, which is what aspects of the old are you bringing into the new? And you're telling me that offers something with the height, which was uncharacteristic, which is uncharacteristic of other buildings. So I appreciate that element. And I mean, you've answered my question, which is to say you're not keeping any part of the outside of the facade as a nod to sort of the different ages. So you've answered it, but without answering it. So I guess all very impressive as well. Yeah, I'm interested in if the Heritage Committee has any perspective on that as well. So when you bring it to the Heritage Committee, I'd be curious to hear what they say about that too. Again, I really don't have an opinion on it. It's more just a curiosity, truly. So thank you for answering.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through you, Chair Freeman. I'm curious, given that the official plan contemplates 12 stories on this site, and you're proposing only 10 and 9 as it sort of transitions down to the adjacent neighborhood, I'm curious why you weren't considering going to 12 stories, given that that's what the OP says. If you could provide some context to that, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor. We're working with an existing building and the existing structural supports of that building. There is underground parking here with the structure on top, so we are limited in the weight that we can add to it. We also wanted to be cognizant of things like parking, the amount of amenity space we could provide, and those factors. But I mean, we could always look at 12.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up? Okay. Other questions from council? Oh, Councillor Wright.
Yes, thanks. Through you, Mayor. I am just wondering about the timing for a project like that in the context of retrofit and the fact that, you're not having to build the building from scratch and create the foundation. So I guess I'm thinking about the economies of not having to have more concrete necessarily, and also possibly a shortened building cycle. And I'm thinking in particular about the neighborhoods and the pressures on the neighborhoods, because they've lived through a lot of construction to date. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, to the Councillor, I will defer to John for the technicalities on that. I'll just succinctly say it will be shorter than a new build, but John, if I could call you up again.
Thanks kindly through yourself, the chair, to the councillor. The part of the technical challenge with this building is that there is actually a lot of concrete. It's got to come off that facade, and in part answer to the previous question, the weight of that concrete is being relieved from the building is part of the structural equation for why we can add, 2 and 2.5 and 3 stories in the way that we are proposing. Certainly, the existence of the building in terms of its raw strip form as 8 stories, the building was actually constructed. It's a 7-story building, but the roof of the building anticipated an 8th story. So again, that's a gain because that upper slab is level. It's not a sloped affair that is sometimes done for an existing roof. So we have these advantages to start with, but we need to be fair to the building and the process and the builder because all of that precast concrete has to come off, and that's going to be something that needs to happen, for instance, on the front of King Street with a functioning LRT that is passing by as that is happening. So there are some logistics and structural challenges and construction challenges. We acknowledge that the build period is likely to be shorter, and we acknowledge as well that we're going to have to be very careful in terms of how we plan for the logistics of both relieving the suit of armor that is presently on the facade and then working backwards from there. Trusting that answers.
Thank you, John. And did you have a follow-up, Councillor? No? Okay. Any other questions from Council? Okay, thank you very much. I'm just wondering if either of you, and I don't know if this is a question from John, or because earlier today we had a delegate come in to talk about just the carbon emitted and carbon saved sometimes with retrofits and repurposing buildings. I'm just wondering if you have any sense of whether this is carbon neutral, carbon intensive, carbon, like where we are in the carbon budget piece of this. Or is that hard to estimate yet?
Madam Chair, I think in broad terms, we know and understand that the incredible mass of concrete that is there and that it exists represents embodied energy. And to tear this building down and to, in turn, place more concrete and return to that is going to be a carbon-intensive exercise. So the most sustainable building in many respects is the one that already exists. And certainly moving forward from there, the development of this building will have high-performing heat pump technology and other technologies that will be invested in, and it is the intention, I believe, of the design team and the ownership to move forward. I can't quantify specifically, whether we're going to end up at carbon neutral, but I would doubt at this point it's a net zero building, but it's likely to be approaching as sustainable an exercise as we can, given existing building. Let's throw some of the concrete in and put it to other uses, but let's retain an astonishing amount of embodied energy that is sitting there in the form of the concrete structure.
Thank you. That's helpful. And just my last question is, are there currently tenants in the building? And if there are, I'm just curious if there's tenants in the building or not right now.
Yeah, to you, I believe there are some office tenants in there. They're aware of this conversion request. It is not fully tenanted right now.
Thank you very much. So seeing no other questions from council, thank you very much for the presentation and the information that all three of you provided. And there is one other delegation, Susan Marchirio. I apologize for not saying your name correctly.
Susan Marchiori.
Marchiori, sorry about that. Thank you, Susan. So just for the record, please provide your name and your municipality of residence for.
My name is Susan Marchiori. I live at 190 Mary Street, Waterloo.
Great, thank you so much. You have 10 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I realize that you're just at the beginning stages of trying to decide what to do with this development. I lived in the Mary Allen neighborhood for 23 years now. In fact, I live at the corner of Mary and Allen, and I see my house as a gateway into the neighborhood, but I also see the entranceway from King Street as a gateway into our heritage neighborhood. And I think it's really important that whatever's decided for this site, and I can well appreciate your comments, Councillor, about maintaining the diversity of the types of architecture in our neighborhood and moving forward, the kind of Waterloo we want to have in moving forward into the future. It's just a few things I was hoping that you would be able to consider when you're looking at this project. And again, once again, I know it's very early in the stages, but the Mary Allen neighborhood is a very vibrant heritage neighborhood with a vibrant neighborhood association, and it's a very mixed neighborhood with many older people like myself living in the neighborhood, as well as many new families moving in. And there's lots of development around us, as was also mentioned this evening. And I think what's important to me as a typical resident, I would say, is not to change the height, to try to maintain the height. And the reason for that is that I think it's really critical that it matches the red condo across the street and that it is a visual gateway into a heritage neighborhood. I'm also hoping that the wide sidewalks are kept to encourage walking and cycling and the safety aspect of that busy corner, and the preserving of the existing trees and adding park space and greenery if possible to allow for, like, I was happy to see that the development had 3-bedroom units, because I think we need to be encouraging families to be moving into condos as housing gets so expensive. And traffic in the neighborhood has become a big issue. I do understand that Allen Street, I believe, is a regional road, but I think it's something to consider about the increased traffic that this development will have in the neighborhood. Allen Street is used quite extensively for children to walk to school, and it's a very, very busy corner. I can attest to that, being right at the corner and all the rest of the condos in the neighborhood, and people walk the community from all the existing development that's already there. So I think it's really important to look at the traffic and the considerations for Allen Street. So those were just some things that I wanted you to consider as you move forward into this project. Like I said, I know it's very early in its stages, but being so close to the development and having watched Allen Square and what it has gone through in the past few years since the pandemic. It is an exciting proposal, but I also, I think it needs to be done right, being adjacent to a heritage neighborhood. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you, Susan, for coming in and sharing your thoughts as someone who lives in the neighborhood. So, Council, are there questions of the delegate? Seeing none? Oh, no? Not for the delegate. Okay. Thank you so much,
Thank
Susan.
you.
I appreciate it. So, Council, unless there's other questions from Council, you have a question, Mary Lou? Okay.
Through you, Mayor. I'm not sure if that's Max is best to answer this question, or Carol or Jennifer. I'm just curious just about the comment about sidewalks. Is there any indication that sidewalks would be impacted by this? Would they be reduced, or has that been
through Mayor McCabe to Councillor Rowe? The intention would be to preserve, if not ideally widen. Now, transportation staff have reviewed it, and I can't recall the comments precisely, but I think there was a conversation about potential widening on Allen. However, it'd be a conversation amongst staff, because there are existing tree assets there that we would prefer to preserve. So a balanced approach on that street, I think, would be the best route forward. But certainly we want our sidewalks to be as wide as possible and to meet AODA standards and all engineering standards. So
great? Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. And did you have a follow-up? No. Any other questions from council? Okay, seeing none. If there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're just double checking we had quorum, Natalia. I think we're okay. Yeah, okay. So the next item on the agenda is official plan amendment 47 and zoning bylaw amendment Z23-07. Sorry, I'm just lost my place there. 2439675 Ontario Inc. and 2439672 Ontario Inc. 535 King Street North and 450 to 560 Weber Street North. Wendy Fisher is here to provide an update, but in advance of that, I will repeat, this is an informal public meeting to consider items, what are we on here, 9B. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position on this application, and a staff report will be considered by council during a formal public meeting at a future date. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject areas and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. Anyone who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located on the desk at the rear of the council chambers. The planner, Wendy Fisher, will now provide a brief overview of this application. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor McCabe, councillors, and members of the public. The applications being presented for information tonight include Official Plan Amendment 47 and Zoning Bylaw Amendment Z2307, which apply, as you say, to 435 King Street North and 450-460 Weber Street North. The lands are owned by two numbered companies, represented here tonight by MHBC Planning and ABA Architects. So the site is generally located south of Highway 85 between King Street North and Weber Street North. The King Street lands currently contain two low-rise buildings as well as some surface parking. And the Weber Street side contains a vacant field that's used for farming purposes. The size of the property is approximately 7.2 hectares. Each portion of the property does have vehicular access to the road on which it fronts, and there are currently no connections between the two parcels. The intersection at King Street and Blue Springs Drive is signalized, and there are two bus stops that are adjacent to the property on King Street, with the Ion stop located approximately 1 meter north of the property at Conestoga Mall. In terms of the surrounding land uses, to the north we have office and commercial uses. Directly adjacent to the property is a car dealership. Further north, we have the Waterloo Inn, which is currently subject to application for a mixed-use development. To the east of the property is again a mixture of office and commercial uses, as well as a residential tower condominium known as Club Willowells. The properties also contains a number of amenities and ponds that are associated with that condominium. And up in the right-hand corner, you'll see Blue Springs Park as well as 4-Well Trails. To the south immediately, we have again more commercial and offices, which includes a grocery store. And then to the west, we have a mix of low and medium density residential, 2 school sites, as well as Sugarbush Park, which is a forested area containing a number of trails. Just by way of additional background information, both of these properties have been subject to previous applications in the past. For 5460 Weber Street, there was a official plan amendment and zoning bylaw submitted in 2017. And for 435 King Street, in 2022, we saw a zoning bylaw amendment submitted for a mixed-use development. Since both of these applications were submitted, the region has conducted a review of their employment lands region-wide, and an amendment was taken forward that has been approved by the province, which has recognized the fact that the portion of the lands at 450-460 Weber that are designated employment are not deemed to be regionally significant. So this means that the city the opportunity is now there for the city to consider a broader range of uses on this property or this portion of the property. And with that in mind, the applicant has looked at and reconsidered the properties and now bringing forward both properties as part of this development. So, sorry. There we go. In terms of the actual development, the applicant is proposing 7 buildings, 13 towers. The building heights will range from 6 stories to 35 stories, with the tallest building located on the King Street side. The proposed density is approximately 618 bedrooms per hectare, and the primary uses include residential, office, and commercial. And as part of that commercial, it also contains a daycare is proposed. At full build-out, the site is proposed to contain approximately 2,972 residential units, of which 2,861 will be 1- and 2-bedroom apartment units and 111 3-bedroom stacked townhouses. The development will also propose to contain 14,400 square meters of office and commercial space, as well as just over 7,700 square meters of privately owned public spaces, or similar to parks, approximately 3,500 parking spaces and 1,780 bicycle parking spaces. There we go. So the proposed development is to be constructed in a series of phases, as you can see by the rendering in front of you, starting with 1A, located in the northwest corner of the property, and followed by 1B. This phase brings in about 33% of the overall residential units that are proposed. There is a small area of residential that is proposed in the corner of this particular building. And you'll also notice that while pedestrian access is provided to other lands outside of Phase 1, vehicular access is only provided to Weber Street. Phase 2 is the area in purple, and it is proposing about half the office space that is in this building in this area here. There is also retail proposed in this area. And in behind the office is the daycare that they're proposing with outside daycare as well. This particular phase will bring in another 27% of the overall residential units that are proposed. And as you can see, there is access as part of this phase to both King Street and Weber Street. The final phase, Phase 3, faces King Street. The remaining residential units would be brought on stream, as well as the other half of the office space and a majority of the retail space that is located facing King Street in levels 1 through 4. So in terms of the planning framework, the westerly portion of the lands are currently designated business employment, and this really contemplates a wide range of uses, including office, medical clinics, manufacturing, repair, storage for really high-value, high-tech products. The easterly portion of the property is currently designated corridor commercial, which is in the green, and then that small sliver of mixed-use community commercial. The corridor commercial is really intended for large, bulky, auto-oriented commercial uses. And then the mixed-use community commercial provides for a range of more traditional commercial uses, as well as residential is permitted in this particular designation above the first story within mixed-use buildings. The area in green is also designated as a specific provision area 44, fronting onto King Street. And this SPA notes that it supports the transition of the auto-oriented commercial uses to more of a high-density use. It specifically identifies that any zone change brought forward should broaden the use of ancillary uses that are proposed. And it does contemplate residential uses on the property, subject to those uses being compatible with the surrounding uses, that they do not interfere with the intended commercial function of the property, and that there's adequate services and amenities to support those residential uses. In the bottom area, we have just an image showing that the lands are within both the minor and major corridor, as well as a major node. And all nodes and corridors within the city are essentially where the city is directing intensification. In terms of height and density, the easterly portion of the property is high density, permitting a maximum height of 81 meters, and the westerly portion is a mix of medium density in the gray and the medium high density in the pink, which affords or contemplates a maximum height of 27 meters and 40 meters respectively. The zoning framework is very similar and implements the official plan. The westerly portion is currently zoned zone change application. Really, this particular zone is intended to allow for the zoning that was previously contemplated while we sort out through these applications what the new framework will consist of. The corridor commercial, or C581, applies to a large portion of the King Street frontage. Again, this is a zone that provides for that large commercial type uses. Residential is not permitted in this zone, and it provides for a maximum of height of 81 meters and 25 stories. And finally, the mixed-use community commercial, or C181, again provides for that wide range of commercial uses. This is where the residential is currently permitted in stories above the first floor, and again providing for a range of ancillary uses. There are two site exceptions that also apply to the lands that front onto King Street. Those exceptions limit the amount of tech office that are currently permitted and prohibit certain uses such as drive-throughs and service stations, and then allow for major office as well, with a range of uses within mixed-use buildings. And lastly, the majority of the lands are within parking area F, which affords a slight reduction to the overall parking rate. So in terms of applications, the applicant is bringing forward an official plan at this time to realize three focuses. One is to redesignate the lands from commercial and employment to a mixed-use high-density residential. The second is to redesignate the Weber Street side from the medium density and the medium high density to the high density 81 meters. And the third is to add a new site-specific provisions to the property that would allow the site to be regulated in terms of its height across the entire property from 6 to 35 stories, as well as permit some of those additional ancillary uses within mixed-use buildings. The zoning bylaw is proposing to rezone the lands again from that commercial C1 and C5 to residential mixed use 81. as well as establish a number of site-specific provisions relating to height, density, the additional ancillary uses, the location and size of those ancillary uses, as well as the maximum driveway width for those portions of the driveway facing a regional road. There have been a number of plans and studies that have been submitted in support of the application, which are before you on the screen. These studies and plans have been circulated to internal departments as well as external agencies for comment and review. And we are, as well as staff reviewing those applications and studies. In terms of process and next steps, we will continue to review all reports and plans. We will be considering all public, agency, and staff feedback. Eventually, we'll be providing some comments to the applicant and reviewing any resubmissions as necessary. We will be working through issues resolutions with the applicant. When we get to that point, staff would be preparing a report for consideration with recommendations for council, and that would be brought forward as part of a formal public meeting in the future and a council decision. So that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Wendy. So council, does any councilor have any questions for staff? Please remember, this is an informal public meeting and only questions of clarification may be asked. Council members should not express opinions at this point in time. Councilor Rowe.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Thank you so much for that report, Wendy. I'm just, Ward 6 is across the street from this proposed development. And so I have heard from residents on Blythewood, Milford, and Parkwood, their concerns about traffic. And I know that traffic is regional, but I was wondering if you could just, in general, talk about the traffic impact studies and perhaps what that would look like to clarify.
Through you, through Mayor McCabe to Councilor Rowe. A transportation impact study has been completed for the application in support, and it is under review by both city transportation as well as regional transportation. This is a site that is adjacent to regional roads, so we await their feedback and comments. I can tell you that the applicant or the transportation impact study has looked at how this development will be brought on stream relative to other developments in the area. So this is a phased development, so over the course of 3 phases, and I believe the intention is to have full build out by 2037. So again, recognizing that there are certain amounts of development and certain amount of trip generations happening on the site over a long period of time. This is also being reviewed on several other applications and sites in the same vicinity where they are larger scale developments that are being phased in from anywhere from 4 to 14 years. So transportation staff will have the challenge of taking a look at each of these transportation impact studies and making sure that the assumptions that are being made are all aligning, as well as some of the recommendations that are brought forward. So taking all of that into consideration. In terms of the future development applications, those are reflected in each of the TISs that are considered for each site in terms of future development. So they are reflected in any recommendations that are brought forward.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions from councillors? Yes, Councillor Basic.
Thanks, through Mayor McCabe. Thanks, Wendy. I could tell where the publicly owned or privately owned public space, how you could easily access it from Weber through the patio, and then it kind of goes up to the other one that does this. But I couldn't tell on the side where St. David's is, like on the south side. Can you access that, Pops, from that side?
Just flip to that. Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Vasic, the second POPs would be potentially accessed. So the second POPs being the larger here has the patio which you would access. This second POPs is not as accessible from the point of view of that it's not fronting onto a municipal road, it would have to be accessed through the driveways. So it would be accessed through the King Street driveway or the Weber Street side.
So, like, would people access it from there? Is it really a public space, or is it? I mean, technically it is, but do public spaces, even if they're privately owned, need to be obvious, kind of like, or is this is sufficient even if the public can access it, even if it's harder to find, that's still sufficient?
Through you, Mayor McCabe. The city has POPs guidelines, and part of those guidelines speak to being that they are accessible. So I think it would be something that staff will be reviewing as we move forward with the application and in discussions with the applicant.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rowe?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Yes, I have an additional question, and I can actually also ask it to Mr. Hawkins. But I'm just wondering about the trails. I was seeing the trails throughout the site, and I know that there are proposals for trails at 475. So I'm wondering if there's any possibility of connecting those, and also to Sugarbush. So if anything you can add to that would be great.
Through you, Mayor McCabe, to Councillor Rowe. It is something that we are reviewing. It certainly is, and the applicant has made an effort in terms of identifying the pedestrian circulation on the property. You'll see that there are sidewalks that are proposed along the northern property line that carry through to the corner here. So it is something that I think they are aware of, that we would like to think comprehensively with this whole area and make sure that there are appropriate linkages made north-south. It is something that staff will pursue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Yep, Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I'm just wondering, there's a line item under Phase 1A that talks about connection to municipal services within Weber Street, for which the owner previously provided funds. Can you provide a little bit of background on that?
Through you, Mayor McCabe. I don't have a lot of information at this time. It was something that I had identified as well in the planning justification report. What I understand that there have been arrangements made between the owner and the region in terms of as part of the Weber Street reconstruction project, and it is something that the owner had made some arrangements, and it's been secured through an agreement with the region to provide connections and upgrades. So it is something that I am going to have to look into a little bit further.
Thank you, Wendy. Did you have a follow-up? No? Okay. Seeing no further questions, thank you, Wendy, very much. And I will call the next registered delegates to come forward, which are Trevor Hawkins with MHBC Planning and Andrew Boosfield from ABA Architects. Thank you for joining us this evening. And you have 10 minutes.
This is going to be a challenge to get through in 10 minutes, but I'll do my best. With me this evening are Kate Wills and Megan Lippert from MHBC, who were instrumental in bringing us to the point where we are this evening, and Andrew Bousfield is the principal architect of ABA Architects, whose vision we see on the screen in front of us this evening. So just to layer on from Wendy's slide, she was pulled in a little bit closer to the property. If we zoomed out a little bit, we see the transit and active transportation connections up to Conestoga Mall. So Conestoga Mall and the Ion Station. The mall itself would be accessible within a 10-minute walk, and if you went a little bit further into the mall and you made your way all the way to the station, the average person could get there in 12 minutes, I'm told by traffic experts. The property itself has transit stops right outside its front door. It has grocery stores, commercial shopping within walking distance. It has employment within walking distance. It has 2 schools within walking distance. numerous parks and other trails and other ways to get around the city without using a vehicle. Recent upgrades on Weber Street for active transportation also make it easier. And then winding your way up to Northfield and all the way to the St. Jacobs Market on some of the new trail infrastructure that the region has installed. So it's in a prime location in terms of the concept of the 15-minute neighborhood and all the things that you can access within a short area. Wendy's touched on it, but I'll just delve into it a little bit in greater detail. So the intent of the laying out of the site and the planning of the site was to recognize the major node and major corridor elements along King Street, and then the minor corridor elements along Weber Street, and some of the existing uses to the west, the low-rise neighborhood, and then the medium and medium-high planned areas south of Milford or on the north side of Milford, on the west side of Weber Street. So the intent was to try and work within the existing permissions along Weber Street, which are 27 meters or 8 or 9 story building, and then working our way towards King Street where greater height and density is planned for. We wanted to situate the tallest buildings further away from Weber Street and closer to King Street where more intense forms of development are already permitted and in some cases proposed. And so the majority of the Weber Street frontage is lined with 6-story buildings, except for the area of the site where 40-meter tall buildings are already permitted. The buildings have been pushed back from Weber Street in these 3 locations to give sort of that 3 to 6-story height framing the street that allows this project to transition from the taller buildings, which are more central to the site, out towards Weber Street, and then locating the taller buildings more central to the site also allows us to transition the height closer to King Street. So you kind of have a sloping up towards the middle, almost like a peak of a mountain, and down towards the streets where the public would, mostly experience the project. The other thing we wanted to do is we wanted to, recognize the planning and the densities that would be possible on the site, but to create open spaces for the community and the residents and employees who would live and work here. So starting with a central park space, we sort of looked at, can we make the buildings tighter and taller? And that would free up more space at grade to allow for park spaces. So these park spaces don't have structured parking underneath them, so all of the structured parking is within the building envelopes, and the park itself has no parking under it. So has the full potential of what a city park would have. And we wanted to provide 2 different park spaces, one that would be the central focus of the development, and one that would allow for some quieter spaces that would blend nicely with the daycare and its outdoor space that's part of its programming. And then we looked at how can we get people into the site from Weber Street. So if residents west of Weber Street wanted to experience these park spaces, we wanted to make it as inviting for them to get into the central part of the site as possible. And from there'll be, on another slide, I'll show you some of the trail and active transportation connections that we wanted to make sure people could get around the site and out to King Street if that was their destination as well. And then we wanted to work with the accesses into the site. So these 2 accesses from Weber Street were approved as part of the reconstruction of Weber Street, and then we wanted to make use of the existing signalized intersection at Blue Springs Drive. So bring people into the site from the regional roads in predetermined locations. This gives us sort of an overview looking from the west of the city. So we see Weber Street here, and the sort of 6-story massing and then 3-story massing along Weber Street to allow for that transition. The taller buildings quite a significant distance away from Weber Street, more focused towards King Street. And then the different elements of architecture to sort of transition the architecture and the look of the buildings from the Weber Street side, which has a more ground-oriented component, a different tower component, and then on the King Street side, you see that sort of transition over towards the busier part of the property, and King Street being the busier of the 2 streets. And so we have the outdoor spaces, but we also have amenity spaces for the residents. So there'll be the at-grade public spaces that will be available to the community, and the residents, but each of the buildings will also have their own amenity spaces as well. So there'll be 38% of the site is landscaped open space, not including those rooftop spaces. So there's quite a bit of landscaping, and that's one of the benefits of making the buildings a little bit smaller and taller, is it's allowed us to create more space at grade that the residents and future employees can experience. Wendy showed a bit of this image, so this just looks at the Parkway Ford building in the foreground, and looking down King Street, we see the tower at King and Columbia, and just the way that we've tried to space out the buildings to allow lots of sunlight and penetration, both into the site and through the site, and then you can see the different architecture looking at the King Street with the waved, and Mr. Bousfield can more eloquently describe it than I can if council has questions about the artistic approach to the design, but you can see the clear distinction between the towers on the King Street side of the building and the towers that are more closer to the middle and the Weaver Street side of the site. And then finally, we have an image here showing the park space. So we have ground-oriented units facing the park space on both sides. The space is suitable for lots of different programming elements. So you can have, we've got a splash pad as an example and a play structure, and then more fitness elements further into the site, with the tower framing the end view as you're coming into the site from Weaver Street, and then an active transportation connection to take you from Weaver into the middle of the site. And then depending on if you want to go north or south or out to King Street, there'll be connections available there. So we see the clear distinction between the podium element in this case, which focuses at the pedestrian scale, and then the tower sort of situated above and set back from the edge of the podium. There's lots of floor plans for a project like this, and many of them are in the package we've submitted to the city that encourage council to review. This is the ground floor plan, just illustrating some of the different uses at grade and how we've tried to activate as many of the exposed sides of the buildings as possible, with the office and the daycare use along Weaver Street in the area where it was previously planned, some retail to spill out onto the park space in this location on both sides of the entry into it, and then a focus of retail along King Street, which was consistent with the planned intent of that area for commercial uses. And then in addition to that, we've got residential units framing the podiums along Weaver Street in these locations, both sides of the park in this location. And we've tried to create either lobby and amenity areas on the ground floor, and as many of the spaces where pedestrians would or cyclists would be experiencing the site. In terms of the parks, so this image shows us what comparison of the size of the parks that we're proposing and how they compare to some of the parks in Waterloo that council may be familiar with. Mary Allen Park, of course, very close by to where we are tonight. So these two spaces combined are almost exactly the same size as the Mary Allen Park. They're bigger than the Alexandra Park. They're 3.5 times the size of the public square, and then comparable to some of the parks we see in other neighborhoods, other residential neighborhoods. So if you look at the two parks, combined, and you visualize the largest turf field at Rim Park, which is a FIFA soccer-sized field, these spaces are larger than that field. So if you sort of stood on that field, I don't know if council's experienced it or played on it like I have, but it's a big space, and running up and down it is a very big space and can accommodate a lot of programming. So if you visualize that field, that's the type of size we're talking about. They're substantial in size, and they'll allow for the residents and the employees to have a large outdoor space, as well as members of the community who want to experience a different type of park setting. In terms of active transportation, so what we tried to do with this project was to start with how people and cyclists would move around the site, and then after that, think about how vehicles would move around the site. So we wanted to make sure that people could get, and then we see the multi-use trails in red, the red dots, so you can get, if these lands ever developed in the future, we've allowed for a multi-use trail connection to the north, and similarly, if for whatever reason these lands to the south develop, there's a connection possibility there. We've got
Sorry, just a reminder, you have 1 minute left.
Yeah, I know, it's hard to get it all in, but essentially, we've allowed for connections to go from Weber Street all the way out to King Street, to bring you into the park, to get you around the park, and to get you to the various buildings. So if you're coming and you live here and you're coming from Weber Street or King Street, you have different ways to get there. If you don't live here and you're looking to move around the site, there's ways to do that as well. Wendy already touched on the phasing, so I won't go into too much detail other than just to say that the first phase would be in this location, connecting to infrastructure on Weber Street. This is a good example of the positioning of the building. So this is the building sort of opposite Blithwood, generally speaking, along the Weber Street frontage. So the building is 106 meters away from those homes on the other side. And even like the podium, the tower is set back 50 plus meters from the street. So set back a significant distance from the street. It really allows the 6-story building with the stacked townhomes to function as what people will experience from across the street or walking on Weber Street. Wendy, again, because of time limits, I won't go into the details, but essentially the OPA is to allow residential uses in a mixed-use format while preserving the potential to do other land uses and other land uses in multiple stories within the podium, not just the ground floor. And we wanted to build in some regulations on height. So specify where the tall buildings are and are not allowed, and specify where the 6-story buildings should be on the site. So that's all layered into our official plan amendment and is carried forward into the zoning. And the nuts and bolts of the zoning are to regulate the height, as I described it, to allow a bit more commercial, a bit larger units of commercial. So the daycare, for example, is larger than the bylaw would normally allow. So that's an example of part of that request. And then to apply a uniform parking rate across the whole site. There's lots of details in the studies, and I won't get into those.
Yeah, it's a big project, but yeah, we're going to have to wrap up and maybe see what questions, but just finish up.
Sure, well, I'll just sort of basically skip to the end, and really our goal was to present a project that realizes the 15-minute neighborhood, aligns with provincial direction, provides a range of housing, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, and a range of land uses within the site, and that complements the land uses around the site.
Thank you very much. I know it's a big site to cover. Appreciate that. Council, questions of the delegate. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Thank you so much for your presentation. Lots of information. As I mentioned before, Ward 6 is along Weber Street, and I have been receiving many comments and lots of feedback from the residents. That area, there is significant development coming, so the residents do have concerns. So what I'm wondering is if there is the opportunity for a community meeting to inform residents and to answer questions so that they feel that they're part of, at least they understand and they're part of the process so that they get the answers directly that they're looking for. So I'm wondering if that's possible on your end and if staff can help organize that, if you're open to that.
Through you, Mayor McCabe, we're certainly open to such a meeting and happy to discuss you can't discuss a project of this scale in 10 minutes, so certainly we'd be open to do that, absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions from Council? Seeing no other questions, I just would note, I guess I'm curious about the parking because as you've noted, it's well supported by transit, and yet there's still over 3,500 parking spaces. So I'm just wondering if you could comment about. I'm curious about why there's so much parking. You're suggesting so much parking for an area that is already well supported by transit.
Mayor McCabe, I think the supply of parking is a direct result of what the bylaw requires. So the bylaw for an RMU 81 zoned property in that parking zone requires 0.9 plus 0.1 spaces, so essentially one space per unit for residents, and then I think it's 2.7 per 100 square meters of commercial. And so we didn't want to appear before council and ask for a reduction. When you have a project of this scale, we felt we could supply the bylaw required amount of parking, but if there's an appetite from staff and council to propose or suggest a lower rate, we wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that being permitted.
Thank you. Not offering any opinion on that tonight, but certainly something I guess that we can think about. And just the other question I have was, are you building into the units themselves some accessibility? I mean, part of our community is everyone's always aging, but just if there's any units that would be explicitly accessible or just sort of generally like around the site as well, if you're considering accessible, sorry, it's getting late, I'm losing my words, just to make the site more accessible for people with, mobility, physical challenges.
We haven't got into that level of detail, but the site isn't graded to the extent where someone with mobility issues couldn't move around the site. The intent would be to create the trail, the pedestrian and cycling network, such that anyone could move around the site. And there will be barrier-free parking spaces in each building, and there will be barrier-free accessible units in every building. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bodley.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor McCabe. A couple of times through through your presentation, you referenced that by having sort of narrower, taller buildings, you were able to have larger park space, more sort of outdoor amenity space for the residents, which is really interesting to me. I'm wondering if you could share some. I'm sure when you're looking at a development of this scale and size, you're starting with what the OP or the zoning sort of looks like. And I'm wondering if you could share with me what that looked like from your perspective when you were restricted to 24 stories as the bylaw intimates, and recognizing that it's unique and different in different locations. If you could maybe share with me what that looked like in the initial planning phases when you guys were looking at this site and whether 24 stories were considered, and if that amenity space piece, the park space, is the real big driver of why you're proposing 35 stories in some areas of the site.
So there's a few elements to that question, which I'll try and unpack. The first is some of the buildings would need to be larger to accommodate the size of units that are being proposed. So they wouldn't necessarily have the same tower footprint that some of the taller buildings have. So we explored a few different ways to lay out the site without, for example, a park space. And it ends up being you have more building mass, whether the building mass is 12 stories or 20 stories or 25 stories or 6 stories. You just put more physical structures on the site to make up for the planned, density that the official plan sort of leads us to plan for. I know the land uses in this case were not residential, but the corridors and nodes and so on, if we extrapolate from that. So we didn't go beyond those planned densities. So we thought we have a certain volume of planned residential or planned growth that we wanted to accommodate, and are there different ways to lay it out without sort of thinking 25 stories has been the limit in Waterloo since 2003, thou shalt not go beyond 25 stories. What if we thought outside that envelope? What could we do? And so that led us to think of, well, why don't we push that height, to the middle of the site where it will have less of an impact on the two streets where people will be experiencing the project most of the time, but also the neighbors. And then how can we situate building massing on this site so that we have the right setbacks from each other within the site and from the residents on the other side of Weber Street, so push the massing further away from them. So moving all of these pieces around, it's almost like a Lego exercise in a lot of ways. You want to achieve certain objectives, and there's different ways to achieve them. This was the way we felt provided the most separation from the neighborhood to the west, provided park space for the community and those who would live and work here, and then focused the height along King Street, which is kind of the main corridor, a major node, and closest to the most available transit routes as well.
Thank you, Trevor. Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Bodley? Okay, other questions from council? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Appreciate the information. The next delegate is Barry Turk. Is Barry Turk here? Okay, thank you. Since you had not registered in advance, you have 5 minutes to delegate. And just for the record, as you've heard earlier, please state your name and the municipality. You don't need to state your full address. Just state your name and the municipality for the record. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Barry Turk. I live in Waterloo on Blue Springs Drive, and I am the president of the Club Willowells. As this evening is only asking questions, I would ask what has been undertaken to ensure the integrity of the water flow through the moraine feeding downstream into Four-Well Creek through our ponds? Excuse me. The moraine does exist in that area. It does flow under King Street. It does feed into the ponds known as Four-Well Ponds, and our concern is that as buildings go deeper and deeper, because they go taller, they go into the moraine, and they can seriously impact the flow of water through that moraine. So my question would be, what steps are being taken to protect it?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
I do have a 20-minute presentation, but
if you had, you are able to do a presentation tonight. It's just us that ask questions. So if you had some additional information you wanted to share, you have another 4 minutes.
Well, there's been a lot of work done over the years on the flow of the moraine. Our ponds that we manage on behalf of the condominiums surrounding the Four-Well Ponds feed 1.1 million liters a day downstream into Four-Well Creek, which goes down through the entire Waterloo ecosystem. And construction, as you go down, whether it's elevator shafts, building footings, parking garages, will impact that flow through the moraine. Let me preface, we've not seen any drawings. We are registering a concern because we do know taller up, taller down. And that concern is very real to us on behalf of both our community and the entire Waterloo ecosystem.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I appreciate
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate the opportunity.
And we appreciate residents coming in to share their concerns or raising issues for council to consider, and certainly staff and the developers and the architects to consider. So appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you again.
Thank you. So, council, again, are there questions? Sorry, there may be questions to the delegate. Does anyone have questions to the delegate? Seeing none, okay. So if there are no more delegations, or are there any others who wish to delegate tonight? Seeing none, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. Thank you very much to everyone who participated this evening. So we will just pause for a moment while we ask Councillor Freeman to return to the meeting and to return to chair the meeting.
So thank you, Council and Mayor McCabe. We are on to item 12, consideration of notice given at a previous meeting. There's none. 13, notice of motion. There's none. Communications and correspondence, none. Unfinished business, none. Questions, Council? I had a question. It's with regard to Lee Avenue in my ward. It was just recently resurfaced, and I would really like to see if we could undertake some pavement markings, both a center line but also a line edge. I did receive some emails from the transportation department today with a hesitancy to put a line edge from this notion that it may create some conflict with understanding whether it's a bike lane or not a bike lane, whether you can park in it or you can't park in it. But I just think it might be an inexpensive way to create some traffic calming by narrowing the travel space. So I'd really like it if we could reconsider that decision. So I don't know if that's direction to staff and I need council's assistance with that, but I'd really like to do that. Yeah. Mr. Anderson.
Chair Freeman, on behalf of IPPW, we'll take that away and let us have an opportunity to review it. I know they're doing some center line work, but it was, the issue of the edge painting. So we'll review that again and we'll inform council.
Thank you. New business, council. I think Mayor McCabe, you had some new business.
I do, but I didn't know if anyone else had anything first. Go ahead.
Councillor Bassick.
On Saturday, Rosalie Park neighborhood, the Lincoln Heights neighborhood group, but in Rosalie Park, hosted the second movie night. So it was great. They had popcorn and games, and so many kids were playing on the playground structure. So thank you, past council, for approving that money. And For All ice cream was there. So I think the neighborhood paid for it, but everyone got a free scoop and then some. And the neighborhood was going to purchase this big inflatable movie screen, but in the end, the city purchased it. So the city will store it, and it's going to be available for other neighborhood events. It was a super great night, very cold. I think a bat flew very close to our heads, which spooked my kid, but it made for a very, very fun and entertaining evening. So big thanks to the block connectors and everyone who made that happen, and the neighborhoods team too.
That's amazing. Councillor Rowe.
Through you, Chair. I actually have two things. The first I wanted to mention was Queens on Princess on Sunday was fantastic at Cowboys and Angels. It was such a super event, so much fun. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Cowboys and Angels and the drag performers. It was fantastic. So really great event, which was supporting Spectrum and also Aqua. So that was really great. The second thing I wanted to mention was just to remind everyone that tomorrow, June 20th, is World Refugee Day. And in light of the migrant disaster, the tragedy in the Mediterranean, where hundreds of refugees died, I think it's important to remind people of World Refugee Day and the fact that people they're giving up their lives to try to get to a better life. And we often hear, I think, in Canada, don't always understand what people are fleeing or why they're fleeing, but that they're willing to risk everything to do so, to have the opportunity for a better life for themselves and their children. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And also that the Walk with Refugees for a Stronger Canada is on Saturday, June 24th, starting at Kitchener City Hall for this reason, so that we hear these stories and we understand why people leave their homes and want to come to Canada. So thank you.
Thank you. I had one thing just to say that the Eastbridge Neighborhood Association is having their family fun weekend, like food trucks and things like that. So if you're looking for And a day out, it's 11 till 2, I think. Councillor Hammer?
I'll add Westvale's community fair. It's also on Friday, or on Saturday, same time, food trucks, everything else. So lots happening again in Waterloo.
Yeah, so you can do a bounce from one to the next. Oh, Councillor Wright's got one too.
Got to weigh in on this one. Alexander Park is opening on Saturday, so that's another big accomplishment by the city. Is finalizing that project and officially opening it to the neighborhood. People are very, very excited. Thanks.
That's great. Mayor McCabe.
Great. Yeah, I guess that's that will be the third park in like a month or a month and a half. And when you think of some of the redos that have happened at Waterloo Park, the Rim Park pump track, and then Alexander Park. So well done. That's wonderful. I just wanted to take a minute to make a quick statement about the strong mayor powers that the province announced on Friday. The Municipal Affairs and Housing Minister announced on Friday that the mayors of 26 municipalities with populations over 100,000 will have strong mayor powers. And the stated purpose of this new authority for mayors by the province is to advance ambitious housing initiatives that can also be used for prescribed provincial priorities. And staff, particularly our clerks, are working very quickly to understand what these changes mean because they will come into effect on July 1st. So just a couple of points I wanted to convey to council, to staff, and to the broader public. The first one is that the powers that were announced on Friday are tools available for mayors to use, but they are not mandatory. And the other thing I wanted to point out, and we've just had two informal in presentations, proposals today, I can assure you that various housing applications covering a wide range of housing needs in Waterloo are being discussed and are being approved in Waterloo and have been for a number of years. And we recognize that planning staff are working really diligently with developers, with the community, and with council to ensure that the potential developments are examined as thoroughly as possible, with questions asked and answered, and with appropriate community input. Municipal government is about collaboration, and I do believe that council collectively plays a really important role in the decision-making processes that we go through, and that we do so with the best intentions of our community in mind. I also believe that municipalities are the most trusted order of government in Canada, and we have statutory obligations in Ontario for transparency, openness, and accountability, and these are unequaled by either the province and the federal government. So I just want to let people know that I certainly have no intent to develop my own budget. Not developing a shadow budget. And as soon as possible, which is sometime after July 1st, I will delegate back to the CAO the various authorities that the CAO, Tim Anderson, currently has. As I've said before, we need strong cities, we need strong communities, and not necessarily strong mayors. It's my hope that the province and the federal governments will respect local decision-making and not override the local decisions and local directions that local council we collectively provide, staff and council and the community collectively provide. So I hope that helps people just understand a little bit more where my headspace is with regard to these new legislative authorities, powers, if you will, that are coming into effect very, very shortly. I believe the best decisions are made when we consult and listen to each other, staff, community, and council, and certainly plan to continue to do so. So thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mayor McCabe. we're on, under new business 2 is the regional council meeting, and I do need a vote. Someone to move a motion that we will attend that. So moved by Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Rowe, all in favor. That is carried. We are on to enacting bylaws. Do I have a mover for the bylaws? Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Bodley, all in favor. That's carried unanimously. A motion to adjourn council. Moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Vassic, all in favor. It's carried unanimously. Thank you.